Welcome to the deep dive. You bring the curiosity, we bring the insights, pulled straight from the sources you share with us.
And today, we're diving into something pretty fascinating. It's this overlap, this surprising similarity between really cutting-edge tech ideas about extending consciousness and, well, ancient religious ideas about the afterlife.
Yeah, it's a bit mind-bending. We're using a paper called Technological Transcendence and Religious Conceptions of Afterlife as our main source here.
Exactly. And our mission, really, for this deep dive, is to figure out how these two seemingly very different worlds, technology and religion, are maybe tackling the same basic human desire. The wish to live beyond our physical limits, to keep our identity going somehow.
Looking for those connections.
Yeah, those surprising points where they kind of meet.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit. I mean, for millennia, right, religions all over the globe, you think, ancient Egypt, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, so many others, they've all grappled with what happens after we die.
Right? These beliefs, they offer comfort, they give a sense of purpose, a way to understand our place in the cosmos. They're deeply ingrained.
But now, and this is where it gets really interesting, like you said, there's this other track emerging from technology.
Yeah, totally. Advances in things like AI, neuroscience, computer science, they're pushing towards a kind of, well, secular version of transcendence. And it's not just pie in the sky stuff. There's serious money and research going into this.
So the big question the paper digs into is, are these two things, religion and tech, fighting each other? Or are they maybe, just maybe, different answers to the same fundamental human questions about existence, about mortality?
Could technology actually end up fulfilling some of those really old religious ideas about what comes next? It's a provocative thought.
It really is.
Right.
So the paper talks about four main technological paths being explored. The first one is digital mind uploading and consciousness simulation. What's the basic idea there?
Okay, so the core concept is this. Maybe consciousness isn't locked into our brain cells or biological stuff. Maybe it emerges from the pattern, the way information is processed.
Like the software, not the hardware.
Kind of, yeah. So if you could map that incredibly complex pattern of connections and activity in a brain and then recreate it digitally, say, on a powerful computer.
Then consciousness could, theoretically, continue in that digital form.
That's the theory. You hear about things like whole brain emulation, detailed mapping of neural networks, trying to get that wiring diagram, and needing massive computing power.
But we should be clear, right? We can't actually do this yet. Fully upload a mind.
Oh, absolutely not. Not even close. But it's a direction research is heading, a goal for some. It reframes consciousness as potentially substrate independent. That's the radical part.
Okay, so that's uploading a complete digital copy. What's the second tech approach?
The second one is maybe a bit less abrupt. It's called gradual consciousness transfer.
Gradual. How does
Right.
that work?
Well, instead of a sudden upload, it's more about slowly merging biology with technology. Think about advanced brain-computer interfaces, maybe neuroprosthetics that replace or enhance parts of the brain, techniques to preserve neural patterns while the biological brain is still functioning.
Ah, okay. So you're sort of integrating bit by bit.
Exactly. The idea is that this might help with the whole "is it still me" problem, the continuity of identity,
Right.
because your original brain is part of the process all along. It's not just switched off and copied.
That makes sense conceptually. Less of a sudden break. Okay, from gradual integration, what's next? You mentioned some more out there ideas.
Yeah, the third one definitely pushes the boundaries. It's this concept of distributed consciousness or networked existence.
Distributed, like spread out.
Kind of. The idea is that consciousness might not need to be housed in one single thing, whether it's a body or a single computer system. It could potentially exist across a whole network of interconnected systems.
Wow, okay. Like cloud computing for the mind.
That's one analogy people use, yeah. It draws on ideas from network theory, distributed computing, even research into collective intelligence, like how swarms or groups can show intelligence.
So yourself could be bigger than just one point.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
It really challenges the standard view of a single unified self. It might mean identity persists even as consciousness kind of expands or merges into larger networks.
That sounds strangely familiar, almost like some mystical ideas of expanded consciousness.
There are definitely echoes there, yeah, which is part of the paper's point. Okay, and the fourth technological pathway.
Right, the last one is legacy AI and simulacrum creation. This one feels maybe a bit more achievable in the nearer term.
What does that involve?
It's about creating AI systems that mimic a specific person. Think about training a really advanced AI, like a sophisticated chatbot, on literally everything someone has ever written, said online, their emails, social media, maybe even recordings.
So it could talk like them, access their knowledge, maybe even replicate their personality quirks.
Exactly. It could create a very convincing simulation, a simulacrum, of that person you could interact with after they're gone.
But let's be clear, this isn't saying that consciousness continues, right? It's more like an interactive echo.
Precisely. It's not consciousness continuation like the other ideas, but it definitely makes you think about identity and how it can be represented, how parts of us can persist externally.
Okay, so those are the four tech pathways: uploading, gradual transfer, distributed networks, and legacy AI. Now let's switch gears to the religious side. The paper also breaks down afterlife beliefs into four main types. Where do we start?
Let's start with resurrection and bodily continuation. This is really central to the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam.
Right, the idea isn't just a disembodied spirit, but often involves the actual body being restored, maybe transformed, but still fundamentally you.
Yeah, a kind of perfected or incorruptible body, but still physical in some sense. And crucially, your personal identity, your memories, your consciousness, they're preserved. You overcome the limitations of your earthly body, but you continue.
You see this really clearly in Christianity, with the focus on Jesus' resurrection as the model, and in Islam with detailed descriptions of bodily resurrection on the Day of Judgment. It's continuation with a form.
Okay, so that's category one, individual continuation, transformed body. What's the second religious approach?
The second is reincarnation and sequential embodiment. This is key in dharmic religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism.
So the idea of being reborn.
Exactly. Some essence or aspect of consciousness carries over from one life to the next. Now, what carries over, that's where it gets interesting and varies.
Oh, so.
Well, in Hinduism, you often have the concept of the Atman, sometimes translated as a soul or an enduring self that moves between bodies. But in Buddhism, it's different. There's generally no permanent, unchanging self or soul.
No soul. Then what reincarnates?
It's more about a continuity of consciousness patterns, habits, karmic imprints. Think of it like lighting one candle from another. The flame continues, but it's not the exact same flame substance. It's the causal link, the pattern, that persists.
That's fascinating. The emphasis on the pattern continuing. It sounds a bit like that information idea from the tech side.
It really does. And in both traditions, often the ultimate goal isn't endless reincarnation, but escaping the cycle altogether, reaching moksha or nirvana, a state of liberation.
Okay, patterns and cycles. Got it. What's the third religious category?
Third is the idea of spiritual realms and non-physical existence. It's super common across many, many religions.
Like heaven, paradise, other dimensions.
Exactly. Places beyond the physical world where consciousness goes after death. The core idea is release from the physical body's constraints, but you still retain your essential identity, your memories, your self-awareness. These realms often have different rules, different possibilities.
So you're just somewhere else in a different state.
Pretty much. A non-physical but still individual existence. And the fourth category.
The fourth one is maybe the most different, mystical union and the transcendence of individual identity.
Ah, right. This is where you get into the deeper mystical streams within religions like Advaita Vedanta, in Hinduism, certain Buddhist paths to enlightenment, Christian mysticism, Sufism, and Islam.
What's the focus here?
It's less about just continuing your individual self and more about merging with something ultimate. Union with God, with the absolute, with cosmic consciousness. Your individual identity might be transformed, expanded, or even seen as ultimately illusory. It's about dissolving the boundaries of the self.
Going beyond the individual I. Okay, so we have these tech approaches and these religious concepts. They sound pretty different on the surface, but the paper argues there are these underlying structural parallels. Where do they connect?
Well, one big one is this tension between preservation and transformation.
Me.
Both sides wrestle with this. How much of the current me needs to be kept, and how much should be changed or perfected in that future state? Is the goal just to extend what we have or to become something better, more?
Yeah, like in resurrection, it's often a perfected body. In uploading, do you fix flaws or just copy them? It's about what the ideal end state looks like and how much continuity you need.
Exactly. Another parallel is embodiment and substrate. What contains the consciousness?
Right. Is it the biological body? A resurrected body? A spiritual form?
Right.
Or a digital server?
Both frameworks are thinking about the relationship between consciousness and whatever holds it. You could almost see religious ideas of spiritual bodies as analogous to tech ideas about digital forms or avatars, and heavenly realms could be compared to virtual realities designed for uploaded minds.
The idea that consciousness needs some kind of container or environment seems common. What else?
Then there's the interplay between individuality and interconnection.
How does that show up?
Well, those tech ideas about distributed consciousness, where you might be part of a larger network, that resonates strangely with mystical ideas of merging with the universal consciousness, or religious concepts of being part of a larger spiritual community, like the body of Christ or the Sangha.
So both explore this balance, remaining an individual versus becoming part of something bigger.
Yeah, they both push at the boundaries of the individual self and its connection to others, or to a larger reality.
Interesting. Any other big parallels?
One more the paper points out is access and democratization. Who gets to achieve this transcendence?
Ah, right. In religion, there are often ideas about salvation, grace, good deeds. Who is worthy?
And with technology, you immediately run into questions of cost, resources, social equity. Will mind uploading or radical life extension only be for the super rich? It raises huge ethical questions about fairness and access, similar in structure, if not in detail, to religious questions about who attains the desired afterlife.
These parallels are pretty striking when you lay them out. Now, the paper brings in this concept that could potentially bridge these worlds. Thinking of the soul not as a thing, but as an information pattern. Can you unpack that?
Yeah, this is a really key idea. Instead of some ghost in the machine substance, what if the soul, the essence of who you are, is actually the incredibly complex pattern of information that makes up your mind? Your memories, personalities, skills, ways of thinking, consciousness itself.
So it's the organization, the structure, the data.
Exactly. The pattern. There are historical roots for this. You could look back to Aristotle talking about the soul as the form or organizing principle of the body, not just separate stuff. Or, as we mentioned, the Buddhist focus on patterns of consciousness continuing, not a fixed self.
And modern science supports this view, too.
Increasingly, yes. Neuroscience often talks about consciousness arising from specific patterns of neural activity. Functionalism in philosophy suggests mental states are defined by their function, their role in the system, which is essentially an informational concept. Information theory itself provides tools to think about complex patterns.
So if the soul is the pattern, then preserving the pattern is preserving the self, regardless of what it's running on flesh or silicon.
That's the implication. It makes the technological goal of capturing and replicating those patterns seem like a way of potentially preserving the essential person.
How does this connect back to religious ideas, then? Does it clash?
Not necessarily. The paper suggests it could offer new interpretations. Maybe divine creation could be understood as the creation of unique, complex information patterns. Perhaps traditional ideas about the soul were trying to grasp this concept of essential identity pattern, just using different language.
So it could actually create a kind of common ground, a shared language between, say, theology and information science.
Potentially, yes. It allows for a dialogue where soul isn't automatically dismissed by science, and information pattern isn't automatically seen as reductionist by religion. It focuses on what constitutes identity.
Okay, that's a powerful bridging concept. So finally, thinking about all this, the tech, the religion, the parallels, the information idea, what are the really big philosophical takeaways? The huge questions this raises.
Oh, they are massive. I mean, first off, it forces us to reconsider what it means to be human. If consciousness isn't tied to biology, what are we? How does our purpose change if death isn't the end, or if existence can be extended massively?
Right. And the justice question you mentioned earlier becomes huge. Who gets access? If this tech exists, how do we ensure it doesn't just create an even wider gap between haves and have-nots? What's fair?
Absolutely critical. Then there's authenticity. Would a digital copy really be you? Would that existence have the same value, the same meaning? How do we maintain values in a potentially radically different form of existence?
And who decides the rules? How do we govern these technologies? Who gets to define what counts as a successful upload or a worthy continuation?
Exactly. We need frameworks, ethical guidelines, and probably input from lots of perspectives, scientific, philosophical, and yes, religious traditions that have been thinking about ultimate questions for millennia.
It really does feel like these two streams, technology and religion, are converging on some of the most fundamental questions we can ask.
They really are. And that brings us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to chew on. As technology keeps accelerating, how is our very understanding of being human going to shift? How will our hopes for what comes next evolve at this boundary where science and maybe spirituality seem to be meeting?
And maybe more personally, What parts of your identity, yourself, feel the most essential? What would you absolutely want to preserve, no matter the form, no matter the substrate? Definitely something to think about long after this deep dive is over.